All right. Happy Thursday night, listeners and viewers. I am author Sierra London, and along with my guest co host, Michelle Ingrid, we are Women on Words, the podcast where we talk life, love, and literature. And tonight's guest, special guest really, is editor Jeni Chappelle. Ladies, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Thank you.
It's awesome to have you. So let's get started. So, Jeni, why don't you start off telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do in the industry and how long you've been doing it?
Okay, so my name is Jenny. I'm a freelance editor, so I typically work directly with authors, not like for a publisher. So I
Okay.
work with authors who are self-publishing, authors who work with small presses, and may need additional editing on top of what your offers. And then I also work with querying authors. Sometimes even after an author has an agent, if their agent isn't very editorial, then they might need some additional feedback from a professional on a story that they're working on, that kind of thing.
Oh,
So yeah, primarily which is editing kind of at the story level, so plot, character, pacing, those kinds of things. I also do copy editing,
okay.
which I think is what we kind of think of as editing, being like spelling, grammar, punctuation, those kinds of
Yes,
things.
absolutely. Yeah. And could you actually spend a little bit more time with that, talking about different types of editing, like an author might get from you or working with you, the different types, and explain it to us? Because I don't think it's always clear. I think we have one type of editing in our head, but of course, the services are a lot more dynamic than that.
Yeah, so every story that's published really needs to go through multiple rounds of editing. And
Mhm.
sometimes we kind of combine some of those rounds, and you can get it from different places. It doesn't always have to be from a professional editor per se. So there's lots of different ways to go about it, but the basic 4 rounds of editing are developmental content editing, which, like I said, these are high level, big picture storytelling issues. So plot, character development, pacing, showing and telling, whether the voice is strong, those kinds of things. And then from
Okay.
there, we would move on to line editing, which is flow. It's about the style. It's about how you go from word to word, sentence to sentence, paragraph to paragraph, and how all of those things kind of flow together.
Mhm.
And then once you get that nailed down, you move on to copy editing, which is, um, like I said before, it's spelling, punctuation, grammar, but it's also awkward word choices and
Mm.
repetition, unintentional rhyming or alliteration, making sure you don't repeat the same word or the same gesture too many times. Like you don't want to have, someone smiling, just, they smiled like 100 times in your book.
Yes.
Like those kinds of things. Those are the kinds of things that a copy edit will handle. And then once you're done with all of that, then you go through a final process that's proofreading. And so if you
Mhm.
work with a traditional publisher, they're
Yes.
going to take you through all of those phases. If you self publish or work with a smaller press, then you might go through some of them, but not others. You need to make sure your book goes through all of those phases.
Wow. Okay. You said a lot there, because I know originally when I came into the industry 6 years ago, the only thing that I think I really knew about was copy editing. And
Yeah.
I'm going to jump out there and I'm going to say this, because a lot of that I tried to do myself and it did not go very well. Um, can you speak to um self editing, like going through that first draft and trying to clean it up? Is there a technique or a formula that can help self-published authors like myself to create a cleaner copy before we contact our editor, especially if you only have one type of editor or paying for one type of editing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I have like a free 30-minute webinar that kind of touches on some of this. That's about how to do your own content editing.
Hmm.
And there is a bit of you can only see so much in your own work. You always need to get feedback from someone else.
Hmm.
I encourage every author, regardless of what your path to publishing is, so whether that's traditional, self-publishing, somewhere in between, to do everything you can on your own for free before you
Yes.
hire someone to work with.
Oh, wow.
It'll save you a lot of time. It'll save you a lot of money. Not only do I think everyone needs to know how to self-edit, everyone also needs critique partners and beta readers. And so critique partners are other authors that you might switch writing with, and you would give each other feedback on the other person's writing. And then
Mhm.
beta readers are they're just going to read and give feedback on your writing, and they may or may not be authors. A lot of self-published authors I know have sort of a team of readers who that's all they do. They
Yeah.
read, they don't write, and they are the ones who primarily give them that developmental feedback.
Mhm.
Mhm.
But yeah, so I think it's about learning how to step away and come back with fresher eyes, and then
Mhm.
also sort of switching out of certain mode of your brain. So like you were talking about like copy editing. I think it's very
Mhm.
common to want to get in and like fix up the words right away, but until you get the
Yes.
story really nailed down, there's not much point in fixing up the words. So yeah, so I can actually go on about that at length, but I think really it comes down to um, practicing, reading up on craft techniques,
Mhm.
and then critiquing other people's writing can be really helpful for you too.
Oh, I'm glad you said that. Because I know it's something like when I first came into the industry, um, I was very open to sharing my work with other people. But how important is it to have someone who has an appreciation for your voice and the types of stories you tell when it comes to editing?
Mhm.
For example,
I
I
think
write.
it's super important.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I don't
Go
have to
ahead.
clarify. Good.
No. I think it's super important, and I think that's a big part. It's something I hear from my clients a lot is how hard it is to find people who can give you actionable feedback. So that they can either they're not just like, oh, I loved it, it's amazing, I wouldn't change anything, or
Mhm.
they're like, I don't like it, but I don't know how to fix it. Um, or I think there's also sometimes a set of critique feedback that you can receive that's like, this is what I would do with the story. And they don't necessarily like understand what you're trying to do with the story.
Mhm.
And so
Yes.
I think
Mhm.
it's absolutely essential to make sure that whoever you're really relying on for that story content, especially, to really understand your vision of the story, what you're trying to go for, maybe where you're not quite reaching the mark, but and
Yes.
so then any suggestions they offer is going to be trying to help you achieve your vision as opposed
Mhm.
Yes.
to kind of their spin on the story. And we kind of think of it as not being as important in terms of like copy editing, because like spelling and grammar and punctuation is all the same, right? But it really isn't.
That's
You have to be really careful that you don't get somebody who is too prescriptive with language. So, like, they don't have these ideas about like, this is how all people should talk. And if anybody doesn't talk like that, then, we've got to change it all so that it sounds proper or something along those lines, because that's not how
Mhm.
fiction is.
that's true, and it's
Right.
boring when you do that.
Right.
Okay. All right. So, and then you said something about proofreading before I turn it over to Michelle. You said something about proofreading. Is it necessary to have a separate editor and proofreader, or
Mhm.
can it be the same person?
I think it's usually best Okay, so I think someone can proofread something that they have also copy edited, but
Okay.
you also need other people. So
Okay.
I think, well, first of all, you should have more than one person proofreading.
Yes.
You really need to have a handful of people proofreading because we all miss different things. So, like, something I'm terrible about is words that should be in the text that are not there. So, like a missing word, my brain just skims right over it, and it's like my brain's
Guilty.
just like it's there. Yeah, and so you really need, I think, for especially if you're self-publishing. If you are self-publishing, I highly encourage you to build up a group of trusted people who can send
Okay.
your final product to, and they're going to just comb through it. And this is going to take some time. It's not something you can just like out like a call for it on Facebook or something, and you're just going to get all great people.
Yes.
It's going to take some time to build up that team, but I think having at least 3 to 5 people who are really good with grammar and aren't going to try to change things to make it more like academically correct, they're going to keep your voice intact and all of those things. But yeah, just looking for things like a lot of things that we need to check for in proofreading are things like homonyms. So like words that either mean the same thing or sound the same, like homophones where they sound the same. So like
Yes.
there, and there, like those kinds of things. Because again,
Yeah.
your brain doesn't always catch those things. But there's
Your.
also
Your.
spacing issues sometimes too. Like this is all when you're writing like 60, 80, 100,000 words, there's all kinds of weird stuff that can happen. And you just really need some people to check on that.
That is so true. Now we have a few folks that are watching the show too. So if you all have questions for Jeni as she's explaining all these things and clarifying for us, please go to the Women on Words Facebook page so that we can see what your questions are and your comments. So I want to go ahead and turn it over to Michelle because she has some great questions.
So, welcome, Jeni. My questions have primarily to do with
Thank you.
what are some of the mistakes that you see first-time authors make that would make working with an editor more difficult, and how can they clarify those mistakes and make things easier on themselves working with an editor for the first time?
Yeah, so I think one of the things I see a lot of is you just type the end and then you send it to an editor. Like, okay, well, I wrote it, it's drafted, so that means it's done and ready to be edited, right? No. You really need to go through, I think, 3 rounds of self-editing before you send it to anyone else,
Wow.
just
Okay.
to make sure that you have done everything you can do. And those really need to focus on the story level primarily and not really so much about spelling and grammar, those kinds of things. Those can come once you've got the story really nailed down. So I think that's really important. Something else that I see a lot and I don't think this is exactly what you meant, but it's still something that I see a lot of with first-time authors, and that is not being prepared for receiving feedback. So the
Okay.
first time you
Okay.
get feedback from someone who maybe thinks that there are things that need to be improved on in your story, that's the whole point. You're getting feedback, right?
Right.
But it's
Right.
still like we don't know we're going to have an emotional response to that. And so we can get very defensive from it. We can become angry. We can just feel like
Yeah.
our writing is garbage, so we might as well not ever bother again.
It's your baby.
And so I think, yeah, so I think that that's something that's really important too, is just to know that you probably will have an emotional response. How to
Okay.
react to that emotional response has a lot to do with, how much you've learned to receive critique and feedback in the past, and, whether you give yourself time before you respond. I always encourage authors to have a plan for how they're going to handle that feedback when they come.
Yeah.
Don't just shoot off an email right away when you're still unhappy or any of those kinds of things.
Right.
And then, yeah, so honestly, I think as far as like spelling, grammar, punctuation goes, that really fluctuates a lot depending on the author and what their background is, those kinds of things. Who's done a lot of technical writing or teaching or, those kinds of things tends to have a much cleaner manuscript in terms of spelling, grammar, punctuation. But But yeah, so I think really it's just knowing that you need to do some work on it yourself
Mm,
before you send it to other people. And then again, I just encourage you to do everything you can for free before you pay anyone to do anything.
Okay, so this might be a controversial question. I'm not even sure. So, if you are a first time author and you're looking to get a traditional publication deal, just how much editing should be done to that work in order to preserve the voice that you're going to be presenting to a publisher? I'm always curious about whether or not it's
that's a great question.
smart to have the work completely edited in all facets if you're presenting your voice to someone who's never heard it before.
Yeah, I think that's a great question.
Hmm.
So I think there's a few things there that I need to address. So,
Hmm.
first is if anyone is really changing your voice, that is probably someone you don't want to continue to work with.
Okay.
Whether you're working with them for free, whether you've paid them. Um, Having said that, if your voice is not yet fully developed, that
Hmm.
I give quite frequently, that is, you need to continue to develop your voice. That's not necessarily the same thing. So it's a
Hmm.
tricky kind of balance there between, preserving the intent and making sure that the voice is strong enough. But if there is someone who is they themselves are making changes that truly affect the voice of the piece, that's someone you probably don't want to continue to with. Um, so
Okay.
that's one part of it. Another part of it is, I for if you're seeking traditional publication, unless you really have a lot of problems with like spelling and grammar and those kinds of mechanics, you really don't need to get a proofread or a copy edit. Um,
Okay.
and honestly, I think most people who are to query agents don't need to pay for any kind of editing, at least to start with. So typically, I recommend that you send out some queries first. And again, do everything you can for free. Work with critique partners and betas, and there are forums out there and all kinds of stuff where you can get free input. Really build up your support group, those kinds of things. And
Hmm.
then
Yeah.
try querying some, see what kind of feedback you get. The only reason I think you should pay before you query
Mhm.
is if you've done everything you can for free, you know something is still off, but you either
Mm,
don't know what it is or you can't figure out
Hmm.
how to fix it.
Okay.
That's the only time I would do that. But if you are feeling pretty confident and you've done everything you can, you feel good about the story, the kind of shape it's in, I think you should put it out there before you pay anyone anything for it.
okay.
Okay.
That is excellent advice because I was questioning, if we're doing everything that we can, and we're saving our dollars, then when would we contact someone like you
Hmm.
for, for help with the query letter or our submission package? I was
Yeah.
wondering that. So thanks for clarifying that. Sorry to interrupt, Michelle.
Yeah.
No. So my next question has to do with the proper finding the proper resources to find a freelance editor. One, to find a freelance editor, and secondly, to find a
Yeah.
freelance editor that you can consider trustworthy. Are there very specific resources that you would use for that process? And are there any that you personally would suggest, or lists that you would put yourself on in order for someone to find you?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. So I think I would say approach it like you would approach hiring any other professional, right? So you have a couple of different options. One, you can just like Google, right? You're like plumbers in my town, right?
Right.
So you can just Google, but then you do come up against this, how do I know if this is someone I can trust? How do I know if they know what they're
Hmm.
doing? Maybe it's just some guy with like a plunger and he's going to come to my house, and so it's the same kind of thing. So, agents are supposed to be registered. Technically anybody can just hang out a sign and say they're an agent,
Hmm.
but there are criteria that you should look for. Editors are kind of the same thing, but there's no official like union or like official group to verify that someone has proper education, that they know what they're talking about, like those kinds
Hmm.
of things. So really, anyone can say they're an editor. For that reason, I always say that the best place to start is with authors you know. So ask authors you know, who have they worked with? If they haven't worked with, they know someone who's worked with someone. Network is the best way for you to find editor. Also, for self-publishers, also, if you're looking for people who work with marketing and branding, if you're looking
Mm-hmm.
for cover designers, basically anyone that you're going to give money to, I think that's the best place to start is
Mm-hmm.
who are the authors
Absolutely.
you know who have done this before? Can they recommend somebody? Because that's like, that they've had at least one good experience that they're going to recommend. So I think that's the best place to start. And then if you don't know anybody like that, because we don't all have like really strong networks yet, it takes time to build those up.
Mhm.
You can check professional editing organizations. So here in the United States, there are a couple of them. I belong to the EFA, that's the Editorial Freelancers Association. And then I also
Mm-hmm.
belong to ACES, which is the American Copy Editors Society, I think is what that stands for.
Okay.
And so they have listings of all of their members. But again, it's hundreds, thousands of people. So how do you figure out? So it can be really overwhelming. It really can be. And
Yeah.
so I
Mm-hmm.
think, there's some different ways you can narrow that down. You need to look for somebody who at least has experience with your age category and genre. So, like if
Okay.
you're writing middle grade mysteries, you don't want
Mm-hmm.
to hire someone who only works on like adult romance. You know,
Right.
you want to hire someone who's familiar with what you're writing because
Right.
there are tropes, there are conventions, there are all these standards for, all kinds of things that your editor needs to be familiar with to make sure that your story
Mm-hmm.
is really where it needs to be. So that's one thing you need to look for. Some people like to find someone with like X number of years of experience. That's something
Mm-hmm.
else that you can look for. Then the
Okay.
other part of it is, you kind of start out with like your list of people that you might want to approach. And then I would say, really do your research online. Check out their website. Does it look professional? Do they have testimonials listed? Do they have like a portfolio of books that they've worked on? Um, all of those kinds of things. I think all editors should always have um, the way I think about it is you don't know me at all, and even if someone has recommended me, you need to see that one, I'm a real person. Two, I have some idea of what I'm talking about. And three, I really have been doing this for a little while. And so my
Mm-hmm.
website is really set up to provide that information. So that's one thing. Another thing is don't be afraid to check out their social media.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Absolutely.
see what kinds of things they post about online. Um, because not only do you want someone who knows what they're talking about, but you also want someone that you can communicate with.
Mm-hmm.
So, you need to know if your communication style matches up with their communication style. There's only so much of that you can tell from that, but it does give you maybe another way to kind of narrow down your list. And lastly, get a sample edit, you know,
Mm-hmm.
ask questions of the editor. You can approach them online, maybe comment on some of their things. You can contact them through their website. Not all editors do free sample edits. I used to, but I don't anymore. Do have a
Okay.
very low cost sample edit. So I'm not going to like charge you $300 to look at 5 pages and give
Right.
you an idea of whether or not you should work with me. But I do, sometimes when you're out there, like in the internet world, it's difficult to tell if this is something that's reasonable for you to be paying for or not.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of freelance editors who charge a small fee for a sample edit.
Okay.
So, what is a reasonable turnaround time when working with an editor? Like for our baby authors, let's say they're working on an 80, I'll use the average 80,000 word
Man.
novel.
Yeah.
What is
Mhm.
the reasonable turnaround time for that type of work if the work is um, averagely comfortable where you're not going to be laboring over it? What is the true turnaround time?
Yeah.
What is a reasonable turnaround time? And what is too long for an
Yeah.
editor to work on
So
something?
It depends so much because not all freelance editors are full-time freelance editors.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are doing this on top of their regular job, on top of writing other things. So it really varies depending on what that particular editor's schedule is like. I think what
Mm-hmm.
matters most is don't be afraid to ask them that, and don't be
Mhm.
afraid to, you know, make sure that that's in line with your kind of values on that. So some people
Mm-hmm.
have turnaround times of like 2 weeks. My turnaround times are normally 4 to 6 weeks. Sometimes people who are only able to do this part time might have 2 or even 3 months for a manuscript. So again, it
Wow.
also
Wow.
depends on what are your goals. You know, are
Mm-hmm.
you really building a indie author, and you need someone who has a quick turnaround time? If so, that's something that you need to take into consideration. You
Mm-hmm.
know, if it's
Mhm.
something that you have plenty of time to be able to do those things, and that you have a really good thing about this person otherwise, everything else with them checks out, you know, don't feel too bad about a longer turnaround time. I think what matters most is that they are willing to give you that turnaround time,
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
and aren't cagey about it, and that you have some kind of reasonable surety that they're going to meet that deadline for you. So that can
Mm.
be again through the form of testimonials or, you know, people that you've spoken with personally.
Yes. So I have a question. Is it okay, Michelle?
Mm-hmm.
My question is, and it's in line with what Michelle was talking about, is should you have a contract, a signed contract with an editor,
Mm-hmm.
with everything stipulated
Um,
there?
Yes. Yes, you really should. Again, I know lots of reputable editors who do not have, you know, like hard and fast, like 12-page contracts with lots of legalese. Um, you can, it's my understanding, I'm not a lawyer, so, but it's my understanding that having everything outlined in emails where both parties agreed does constitute a contract.
Mm-hmm.
So again, you just want to make sure that you have some kind of written documentation where both of you have agreed to the price, the turnaround, what the deliverables are, all of those kinds of things. Again, if you have any questions, if you feel like, you know, something isn't clear, so for example, if you need to reschedule what's going to happen, or, you know, like those kinds of
Mm-hmm.
things, um, you know, what happens if the editor doesn't deliver on time, like all of that kind of stuff. You should
Mhm.
always ask that up front. So
Mhm.
yes, so I think again, you know, you just want to make sure you have something written like that you've both agreed to.
Okay. And you mentioned, if the editor doesn't have the work ready on time, but I'd assume the same would go for the author if they miss the deadline in getting it to the editor as well. But I
Hmm.
could be wrong.
Oh no, that happens frequently. There's wording in my contract about that though.
Okay.
So you know, because especially I have that problem. I think. I was going to say maybe especially with indie authors, because I'm thinking the indie authors normally have harder deadlines
Mm-hmm.
than a querying author does. So like an indie author is up against, you know, I've got this pre-order set up, I've got to have it, you know, to Amazon by X date. So if you get that to me late, then that's putting me in a bind. That's a little someone who's just like, I'm going to query it some, but I don't necessarily have to have it by a specific date.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, as an editor, it's kind of a red flag if someone continues to send me things late. Then that might
Hmm.
be something that we either need to discuss, or, you know, I need to let that person go. So really, again, like with any other professional you would hire, you want them to be professional, but you have to treat them with respect too.
Right. Right.
Okay. Wonderful. All right. Any other questions, Michelle?
No, I think I've exhausted my list. Of course, I'm gonna have a million questions as
I
soon as
know when
we're
we get
done.
when we
Yes.
get off. So, Jenny, I want to thank you for coming on the show with us. You've clarified so many things in my mind. You're so great at explaining what you do and how to interact with an editor. I have one more thing I'm going to ask you because it's something I struggle with. Is there a trick or a tip or something you can tell me about getting through my first draft and picking up more? Like, do I need to listen to it? Do I need to break it down in pieces?
Mm.
Do I need to layer how I'm going through looking for the pieces to correct? Like anything, any little nugget that you could just toss my way.
Yeah, so I think the first thing is I do think you should do it in layers, like in passes.
Mhm.
Your first pass should really be just focus on like plot and character.
Mhm.
Don't worry about, is my dialogue perfect, or, are all of my scene transitions exactly where they need to be? Don't worry about any of that until you're
Mhm.
100% sure like that plot and character arc are nailed down tight.
Okay.
Because then otherwise you're just going to be moving around all these small pieces when it's the big picture you need to look at. Um, and so, yeah, I do have a technique that we call the reverse outline.
Mhm.
If you are not doing this, it is a game changer. And
Right.
so it's really just you have to be very quick in explaining it. An outline normally would be you have it all set up beforehand and you know what you're going to write. A reverse
Okay.
outline is what you've already written. And so you just kind of go through and you make notes for yourself about all of that. I have a more detailed explanation at my website. And that is
Okay.
also part of the free webinar that you can access on my website as well. Like I said,
Okay.
that's only 30 minutes. You should definitely download it and take a look.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing that for all the folks. I know sometimes it's hard to get over to websites, so I appreciate you telling us that tonight on tonight's show. So I have your website at the bottom. Do you want to share where else folks can find you around social media and connect with you?
Yeah. I pretty much, you can find me on Twitter. I'm a little bit addicted to Twitter, and I'm at Jeni Chappelle. And then on Instagram, I'm at Jeni.Chappelle, and I'm over there too.
Okay, wonderful. And you all can reach Jeni at JeniChappelleEditorial.com on her website. Jeni, we want to thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. You are always welcome to come back on Women on Words and let us know what's going on, what services you have, if you ever have any specials going on. Definitely want you to share that and mention that as well. So thank you everyone for joining us. And tonight's show, I know I have a banner. I have to keep all my banners updated. So tonight's show was sponsored by the Lunchtime Chronicles Season 4. Be sure to follow the Lunchtime Dish with Messy Mandy for cover reveals, which are happening this week. So until next time, next Thursday, 7 p.m., y'all be amazing, be wow. Take care, everybody. Bye now. Good night.